First graders, good Tuesday morning. I almost said Monday. Good Tuesday morning. Hope you're having a good day so far. Chapter 7 of Surprise Island by the Boxcar children. Chapter 7, Exploring. Here's a couple pictures. Do you know what those are? The next morning, the rain had stopped, and it was a beautiful day. First, the four children went swimming. Then, after breakfast, they started out with the big kettle to explore again. Let's go down to the very end of the island today, said Henry. I'll make a picture of the island as we go along, said Violet, taking the blue book. They walked along slowly until they could see the very end of the island. Look! Oh, look! Cried Jessie. What a big pile of shells! It's taller than Benny, cried Henry, as he and the others ran to the shell pile. They're all broke, said Benny, picking up some shells. Broken, Benny, said Henry. Well, broken then, said Benny. Old broken clamshells. No pretty ones for our museum. Yes, but look, said Jessie. They are all clamshells, just as if somebody had sat here for years getting out clams. Maybe they did, said Violet. Who did? Asked Benny. I don't know, Benny, replied Henry. I know I never saw anything like it before, not even in a picture. He took a stick and dug into the pile. Violet made a little picture in her book of the shell pile. Then the children started to explore the other side of the island. They found that this side of the island was very rocky. Jessie, Henry, and Violet were looking up at the high rocks when Benny said suddenly, Look! A little cave! Let's go in! He's right, said Henry, looking in. They're looking in at the cave. Come on, like this, said Benny, going in on his hands and knees. The other children went after Benny, laughing. Oh, it's just like a little room, cried Jessie, and I can see another one. They all crawled after Henry and came to another little room. They could still see the ocean as they looked back. The children sat down, and Henry began to dig with the stick just for fun. Suddenly, he dug out a small stone. Oops, cried Henry. What is this? He picked up the stone and rubbed off the wet sand. Then he jumped up. It's an Indian arrowhead, he cried. What do you know? Let me see it, said Jessie. It certainly is an arrowhead. See the little place at the end where they tied it to a stick? They put the feathers on the other end, said Henry. It's for our museum, cried Benny. So it is, cried Henry. You think of everything, Benny. Let's dig and see if we can find another. If Indians lived here, they had more than one arrow. The children began to dig. When Watch saw what they were doing, he began to dig too. If we find a lot of Indian things, cried Henry, maybe some real museum will buy them. That is a good idea. Let's come here early some morning and dig, said Jessie. Besides, it's lots of fun. Suddenly, Watch stopped digging and began to bark. What's the matter, old boy? What are you trying to tell us? Asked Henry. He went over and put his hand in the hole Watch had dug and took out a big, smooth stone. I think this is an old axe head, he cried, turning it over and over. The children came to look, and Benny took it in his hand. Watch barked again, sharply. Then he threw back his head and gave one long howl. Something is wrong, cried Henry. Watch never howls. Oh, look, Henry, cried Jessie in a frightened voice. They all looked at the door, and water was coming in almost at their feet. Let's get out of here, shouted Henry, starting for the door. Come just as fast as you can. They crawled as fast as they could, but the water was quite deep. Watch began to swim. Joe doesn't know where we are, cried Benny, or he would save us. I'm scared. Don't talk, Benny. Keep going. Soon they were in the first room. A wave is coming, Henry shouted. When it comes, get out fast. The wave came up and broke over them. Jessie caught Benny's arm and pulled him out. The four frightened children crawled through the water and scrambled along the rocky edge before another wave came in. They rested there a short time and then crawled to the shell pile. Be careful, said Henry. Don't fall. Oh, thank goodness, cried Jessie as they came to the dry sand. I'm all tired, said Benny crossly, and I am scared of that old cave. Well, said Henry, I'm the one who ought to have watched the tide. That cave is perfectly safe when the tide is out. Just think how lucky we are to be out. We, we, we did get out, said Violet. Thank you, good old Watch, for that. She was still so frightened that she shook all over. Right, said Henry. Let's rest a little while, then we'll go back the way we came. When the family came walking slowly back to their barn, Joe saw something that was wrong. He waved to them from the hut. All right, he called. No, shouted Benny. We're scared and almost dead. The water came in the cave and almost all over us. What do you mean? Asked Joe. He was very excited. We crawled into a cave and the tide came up and almost caught us, Joe, said Henry. I should have looked for the tide. If Watch hadn't barked, we wouldn't have seen the waves coming in. I can see that you are all worn out, said Joe. You are too tired to get dinner. Captain Daniel has made a big kettle of stew. Why don't you each bring a bowl down here and eat with us? Jessie looked at Joe and smiled. We will, she said. We'll each get a bowl and a spoon and we'll be right back. When the children sat down on the sand by the little hut, they began to feel better. The hot stew was good. Benny looked sleepy. Where was this cave? Asked Joe. On the very end of the island, said Jessie. We found some Indian things in it. What did you find? Asked Joe quickly. Henry took the arrowhead out of his pocket and gave it to him. We found something else too, but we forgot to bring it, he said. Excuse me. No, I brought it, said Benny, almost asleep. It's in my pocket, and I can't get it out. Joe put his hand in Benny's pocket and pulled out the stone. An Indian axe head, Joe said at once. I thought it was, said Henry, but you seem to be sure. Well, I guess I am sure, said Joe, turning it over. Maybe there are other things in that cave. I'm scared to go in that old cave again, said Benny. Oh, don't say that, cried Joe. Just watch the tide. There must be some good Indian digging in there. If you ever want company, I'd go with you. Oh, would you? Said Henry. Then we would certainly be all right. There's a big pile of shells near the cave, too. What? A shell pile? Shouted Joe. Then I will certainly go with you. I must. Why? Asked Benny. Why must you? But it was the last word he spoke. He was fast asleep. Joe was saved from answering Benny. He just smiled and said, I'll carry him home for you. It will be the best thing for all of you to get some sleep. Excuse me. They're talking about sleeping and I'm yawning. Man, wake up, Mr. Pernsteiner. Joe picked Benny up and took him to his own bed. Jessie, Violet, and Henry followed them to the barn. In a few minutes, the other three children fell asleep right in the middle of the day. Chapter 8. Indian Point. After a long sleep, the children were as good as new. I feel just like starting out again, said Jessie. So do I, agreed Henry. I wonder why Joe was so excited over the shell pile. Let's ask him. Why did you say you must see that pile of shells, began Henry when they had found Joe at the hut. Because I'm interested in things like that, answered Joe. A shell pile means that Indians must have been on this land. Come right along, Joe, said Benny. I'll show it to you. He took a hold of Joe's hand and tried to pull him up. The children laughed as Joe got on his feet. In a little while, the explorers arrived at the shell pile. What a wonderful thing to find, shouted Joe. Why? Asked Jessie. Joe was looking at some of the broken shells. Well, he said, I'm sure the Indians made this pile. Do you remember from school that they made shell money called wampum? Sometimes they use these quahog shells for the purple part. Quahogs are clams. You think they sat here to make wampum? Asked Henry. Yes, and I think they dried clams here too, replied Joe, looking at some unbroken quahog shells. Why? Asked Jessie. Joe laughed and said, These are whole clam shells, so the Indians must have sat here to take the clams out of the shells. They used to dry the clams and then eat them later. Here's a picture of them looking at everything. Jessie knew that, said Benny. She said they sat here for years and years. But I didn't know they were Indians, said Jessie. Do you think we could find any wampum here, Joe? Asked Henry. No, I don't really. They would save it because it was money. but we might find some old tools they used. The Indians used to smooth the shells and the stones and then make the holes with the tools they got from white men. Let's dig, said Benny. You can tell us if we find a tool. I'd like to dig, said Joe, but we ought to have something good to dig with. Let's go back and get something from Captain Daniel. Excuse me. I'm too tired, said Benny, and so is Watch. And Mr. Princeton. Henry laughed. You sit right down with Watch and Violet, he said, and don't go away from here and don't get into trouble. The rest of us will get the things and come right back. Remember now. All right, said Benny, sitting down. While you were waiting, you could do some digging with a stick, called Joe. Save everything you aren't sure about. Violet began at once to look over the broken shells. Why don't you look, Benny, she said. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you and I found something good while they are gone? Let's try. You try, said Benny. I don't care. All I can find is this big chicken leg. Chicken leg, cried Violet. That is too big for a chicken. Well, maybe a horse then. It's an old bone anyway, said Benny. I'll save it for Joe. He will know for sure. Violet dug at the shells. Benny, you know all these shells look as if someone broke them, and a lot of the purple part is gone. That means that Joe is right. They did make wampum here. Of course Joe is right, said Benny. Joe is always right. It seems funny to me, said Violet, that Joe is just a handyman. I shouldn't think he would be working here on this island if he knows so much. Maybe he does something else too, said Benny, and maybe he came here to have a good time and learn things this summer just like us. Then the others came back. They had clam hooks and a shovel, and Joe had a camera. A camera? Cried Benny. You can take a picture of Watch digging up an Indian. I wish I could, said Joe, laughing. I want to take a picture of the shell pile. You and Watch sit right where you are. That will show how big the shell pile is. Violet scrambled out of the way. No, no, said Joe. Don't go. I want you in the picture too. You stand beside Watch. So Violet stood where she was and Joe took the picture. He took 4 pictures, one from each side. Why do you want all these pictures, Joe? Asked Henry. Maybe I'd better tell you something, said Joe. What's he going to tell them? If the people on the mainland knew about this pile, they would be all over here with cameras and shovels before we could stop them. You wouldn't like that, would you? Oh, no, cried Bennett. We don't want a lot of people over here. You children had better not tell anyone about the shell pile before your grandfather knows, said Joe. All right, we won't, said Henry. We'll tell Grandfather when he comes to visit us. Now, let's dig. I'd like to do this for a living, Joe. Go to far-off places and dig up old bones and things. Good for you, Henry, cried Joe. It is very interesting work, but let me warn you, it isn't all fun. You may work for a year and not find anything. Just like fishing, said Benny. Exactly, agreed Joe. Maybe you'd like to work with Henry. No, I wouldn't, said Benny. I'd rather fish because you can eat the fish. You will help us now, won't you? Asked Henry. We need every man we can get. Sure, said Benny. Watch, you can help too. Watch obeyed, but he soon barked and held up his paw. There was a white bone sticking in it. A fish hook, cried Joe. Right in your paw. Watch. Here, let me take it out. It's a fish hook made from an animal bone. That means Indians used to fish here, doesn't it? Asked Henry. Yes, I think so, said Joe. Now, do you want to work just a little more? I'd like to dig under the pile before we go. Sure, said Benny. We're not hungry because we ate so much stew. What do you think we'll find, Joe? I haven't any idea, said Joe. He took the shovel and soon dug quite a big hole. They all got down on their hands and knees to look in the hole. Is that anything? Asked Violet, pointing. It looks like a piece of a dish. Oop. My hand is tingly. It is a piece of a dish, shouted Joe. Here's another piece, said Jessie, handing it to Joe. I think that these are all pieces of a bowl, cried Joe. The children found some more pieces and gave them to Joe. He wiped off the sand and put the pieces together. Yes, this is a cooking bowl, said Joe. I'm sure now that Indians lived here, and that they made wampum here. We may find more things. This island is a wonderful place. Violet could see that Joe kept his eyes on the bowl every minute. That dish tells us more than anything else we have found, said Joe. I don't think so, said Benny, to everyone's surprise. I think my horse bone tells the most because it tells that the Indians had horses. See? Benny pointed to the bone sticking up out of the sand. Benny Alden, Joe almost shouted. The Indians didn't have horses before the white man came. Where did you find this? On the back of the pile, answered Benny. We're digging on the wrong side, I guess. It's a man's bone, Benny, cried Joe. It's a part of a skeleton. Do you know what a skeleton is? Oh, yes, said Benny. All of us have skeletons inside of us. It's made of bones. That's right, said Henry. Show us exactly where you found the bone. Right here, said Benny, going to the other side of the pile. Let's dig, cried Joe. But be careful, down watch. You're a good dog, but this is no place for you to dig. Oh, children, look. Another bone came in sight. If you don't mind, please let me do the digging, will you? Just sit and watch me. The children sat back and watched Joe as he slowly dug the sand away. Even Benny was excited as he saw 12 small bones side by side in the sand. There ought to be another set just like these, said Joe. There they are, shouted Henry. And look, Joe, look at the arrowhead sticking out. He was shot, cried Joe. Shot with an arrow. This is a skeleton of an Indian. Before long, the whole skeleton lay before the excited children. Well, well, said Joe, sitting back to rest. We can't move this skeleton because we haven't the right tools. It will be safe because nobody knows it's here. Let's cover him up again. Cover him up, shouted Benny. But we just found him, Joe. He is for our museum. I know, Benny, answered Joe. Will you leave him here? Just to me, please. We can dig some other day in the cave. Aren't you getting hungry now? Yes, I am, said Benny. Let's go home and get some bread and milk. Jessie smiled at Joe. It was so easy to please Benny sometimes. Shall we take the bowl, Joe? She asked. Oh, yes. Take all the small things to put in your museum. So the explorers took their collection of clam hooks and Indian things and started home for supper. Let's call this the end of the island, Indian Point, said Henry. And that is what it was always called after that. All right. Interesting. Chapter 9 will be tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you're having a good morning so far, or whatever time you're watching this video. I'm having a good morning. Mostly. I woke up really early. In fact, my daughter Emily, her room is above mine. So I can hear her, like, walking around. Anyways, 4 o'clock this morning, I woke up to a sound. Went upstairs. She fell off of her bed and hit her head, and she was crying and, like, half asleep. So we tucked her back in, got her all settled in, and tell you what, I could not get back to sleep. I laid in bed for an hour and a half, tossing and turning. I slept in different positions I don't normally sleep in just to try to get to sleep. It didn't work. I'm still awake. I've been awake since 4:30 this morning, so I'm a little tired, but it could be worse. I don't have to go in and work all day when I'm tired right now, so I'm thankful for that. Glad that I'm able to sip coffee and read books first thing in the morning. That's kind of nice. Let's see. My plans for today. I actually am going into the school today, and I'm going to finish cleaning out my room, and yeah, I'm almost done. I haven't told you guys this, but I'm actually teaching 6th grade next year. Yep, I wanted to stay in 1st grade, but now there's only going to be 3 first grades instead of 4, because the 4th one was the kindergarten 1st grade combo that Mrs. Hagen taught. She's now just going to teach 1st grade, and there isn't going to be a kindergarten 1st grade combo. So I wanted to stay in 1st, but I couldn't because the other 1st grade teachers have been there longer, and so they definitely deserve to stay in 1st. So I get to go back to 6th grade, which is cool. I get to work with Mrs. Tennyson, and I'm actually going all the way upstairs, and I'm going to be in Mrs. Janacek's old room. And you know who's going to be in your room? My old room? Mrs. Hermanson. Instead of being all the way down the hallway, she's moved all the way back up with the rest of 1st grade, which is perfect. That makes total sense. And I'm going to be upstairs in Mrs. Janacek's room. You might even remember having science with Mrs. Janacek. It's the same room that you had science in last year when you were in kindergarten. So that's where I'll be. So I'm excited to be at Brown. Yeah, I am. There was a small chance. There was a chance that I was gonna have to go to a different school, but a teacher left, so I get to stay. So I'm excited about that. So get to start my 4th year of teaching at Brown again. So that's great. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you tomorrow morning. Have a good day.